Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third biennial New York City Food Waste Fair. Before we get started, I wanted to give the attendees a few reminders. First and foremost, I wanted to remind people to use that Q&A box. That's a part of the panel. They have a lot of very interesting things to say about composting and the opportunities there are for entrepreneurship. So please use that Q&A box to submit your questions. They won't be able to keep an eye on the chat as well. So the Q&A box is the best place to submit those questions. A couple other reminders I have are one, the Food Waste Fair's schedule. The Food Waste Fair goes through the end of this week. And if you can check out the rest of the schedule at foodwastefair.com. A lot of interesting panels left, so please go check that out, as well as the Food Waste Toolkit, a guide for New York City businesses and residents to learn about how to reduce their food waste. And you can find that at foodwastetoolkit.com. And without further ado, I'd love to introduce Susan Thoman, our illustrative moderator, and you can take it from here, Susan.
Okay, thank you so much, everybody, and for the opportunity to be the moderator of this session. I have a passion for compost. I've been around it many years, grew up around it, created it before it was ever even an industry, and I'm very excited about the panel we have here today. I am part of the Compost Manufacturing Alliance. We are a proud co-sponsor of this New York City Food Waste Fair, and we also work with WeCare Denali in New York to vet compostable products that will bring in food scraps to make sure they break down in compost piles. So if you want to learn more about us, feel free to look at the toolkit or our website at composterapproved.com. But I want to get on to the panelists because this is a great group that we have here. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover today and then cue it up to our panelists. So composting isn't just good for the planet, it can be good business. So today you will hear from fellow business owners in the New York area on how you can turn your waste stream into a revenue stream through composting. Not only that, we'll discuss some of the social, cultural, and economic benefits that come from some of the great work that our panelists do and how they help promote more food scrap recycling in their respective areas. So with that, I want to launch right into the introductions. The first person on the list that I'd like to introduce is Ceci Pineda, and Ceci's the Executive Director for WeRadiate. So if you could tell us a little bit about you, your role, the organization, and how you support food scrap collection. Ceci, we'll let you take it from here.
Great. I'm just gonna share my screen real quick so to make it a little bit more visual for folks. So I'm very grateful to be on this panel, and I think for us, a lot of like the value that we speak of what we're doing for our communities is thinking about how we invest in local youth, in our soils, and in our communities as well. And so I'm here, have the honor to represent our team of WeRadiate. We launched in 2013, and we are New York City's first bike-powered food waste hauling and composting service. We are staffed all by young people of color who are ages 16 to 25. We operate out of a public space or public spaces, gardens in Bushwick and Brooklyn. And we are a nonprofit. So while our mission may not necessarily be to how we can generate like a lot of money, it's again, how do we generate wealth in our community and investment in our communities? And so just a few pictures to just break down our operations. We essentially collect materials through a bike and with a trailer, as well as through an electric cargo trike that's powered by our solar panels. Our youth then take that on site and weigh material for either each commercial client, or we also do residential routes, so they'll weigh their whole residential route. And we also offer a public food scraps drop off every Sunday from 12 to 3, where we collect material there too. And then our team manually processes everything into compost. This year we are also trying to see how it is, how we can maximize our collections if we integrate a dry biodigester. So just this year we're starting to integrate machines, but our team is still doing the work to take the output from the machine along with some fresh food scraps and still do all of the mixing up. And we operate one of our main systems at our main partner garden, No Wastelands, is a windrow based system. And so it's a lot of work to turn it all by hand, but it's the way that we also create jobs and money for youth who do this work. Then our compost is sifted, or some people pick it up unsifted, and then it's available based by donation for community members, and we also sell some to our retail stores. And I will stop there.
Very good. Thank you. That's amazing. Amazing work. So Sashti Balasundaram with WeRadiate. Tell us about you and your organization.
Thanks, Susan. Good afternoon, guys. And I just want to thank the Sanitation Foundation for this opportunity to actually present. And Brian and Susan, thanks for the opportunity to sort of be sponsors of this event. So with WeRadiate, we started in 2019. We're based in New York, and I'm the founder of WeRadiate. And sort of our mission is to improve our soil and to improve soil health. And we sort of have three categories or three buckets that we work with. One is education and workshops. So we have a number of activities usually throughout the state. One upcoming is actually our Queens Compost Bike Tour. So these are ways to engage the public, maybe stakeholders that are not necessarily in the community itself, but ways that we could talk about food waste reduction and composting. So that's actually this weekend. Another bucket is sort of using precision technology and using our smart sensors in the field. So that's sort of helping with efficiencies and operations. So we have that type of technology for use. And Ceci, total invite to have some of our sensors, and Brian as well, across compost systems in New York, in Brooklyn for sure. And sort of the last bucket is actually to help facilities like farms to start or begin the compost process. People think gardening and farming and composting go together. They do, but farming and gardening is a vastly different skill set than compost. So sort of helping out people who want to begin operations. So that's sort of our three things.
Very good, thank you. Rhonda Sherman, with the Extension Solid Waste Specialist at North Carolina State University. Tell us about what you do.
Okay, so I've been at NC State for 28 years, and for 40 years, I've worked to help keep trash out of the landfill. And I realized that people were talking about how to recycle cans, paper, and bottles, and ignoring that food waste was in the waste stream. So I was writing publications about that back in the 90s. You know, these are extension publications. They're easy to read, they're quick, but and then I kind of accidentally became world famous for vermicomposting from one of those publications, and it just took off. And people were just so excited about vermicomposting that people in 118 countries have contacted me to learn about vermicomposting really on the commercial scale, okay? Because you got small scale, large scale, same with composting. And there have traditionally been information about small scale for both of those, but there just wasn't anything out there about large scale. So I started like 22 years ago, I held the first like worldwide vermicomposting conference. And so for 20 years, I held this annual conference, and people came from all over the world. And then 2.5 years ago, I published with Chelsea Green Publishing, the Worm Farmer's Handbook. And you can see on the screen here, it's mid to large scale. So mid scale would be, something that Ceci could do at, at her composting sites, community composting. And you can do that at farms and businesses. But then you could in schools, but you can do it on a really large scale. And so, all over the world, people are doing super large scale operations of vermicomposting that a lot of people haven't heard about. So in my book, these are, hopefully you've had a chance to scan what's in yellow. So those are some of the things that I cover in my book. And the last chapter is vermicomposting operations around the world. So you can see what people are doing in different countries and the feedstocks they're using and how they're managing it. So there's a real wide variety, but I don't want to take up more time, so I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Rhonda.
Sure.
So we've got to the community composter. We've talked about systems and education. We've talked about vermicomposting, and now we'll hear from Brian Fleury with WeCare Denali about what they do and how they work throughout the U.S. So go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you, everybody. Can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Okay, I'm Brian Fleury. I am the General Manager and Senior Vice President at WeCare Denali. WeCare Denali was formed in 2016. I've been in the business since 2000 under another company name called WeCare Organics, where we primarily operated out of the Northeast. But when we merged with Denali Water Solutions out of Arkansas back in 2016, we really, with the vision of growing the business across the United States. We've been operating the compost operations for the City of New York's Department of Sanitation since 2007. We're on our second long-term contract with New York City Department of Sanitation. It's been a great partnership. We've grown we've helped the city grow the organics program throughout the city by accepting and processing and giving guidance and finding, just as importantly, finding markets for the end products. And so we've grown that over the last, close to 15 years, 14 years now. And we've also taken on some other contracts with the city as well to recycle their biosolids, to help recycle food waste through their SSO program through other contracts with the city. So we've had a connection with the city for a long time. And this is the 3rd annual Food Waste Fair, and we're excited to be a co-sponsor in the Food Waste Fair with the CMA, which we're also a partner in CMA as well. With Susan and I have been partners now for quite a few years. And we also used to sit on the board of directors together at the U.S. Composting Council, where I currently sit as president of the U.S. Composting Council. But so with that said, we now operate. This slide's a little older because we now are in 24 locations in 11 states, and so these are just some of our locations across the United States. And we continue to expand, and we're not just in yard waste or biosolids, but we see the future is in food waste, and we want to figure out more ways to expand the recycling of food waste, keep it out of our landfills, do the right thing, and repurpose what we think is a resource, not a waste, but a resource. So I know we call this we're calling this the Food Waste Fair, but I like to call this the Food Resource Fair. So with that said, Susan, I'll kick it back to you.
Great. This is great mix. And so I had some questions. Some of them are on the list, but so we have three groups here that make compost. So when we're talking about economics, how does it work, Ceci, in your program? Do you sell your bags, I guess, to the public, or what's the economic model for the sale of your product?
Yeah, so for us, we charge for the hauling component. So both households have a sliding scale to also try to make it accessible and equitable for different folks in our community. And then for the I guess biggest source of income when it comes to selling our compost is when we do sell it to retail stores, but that's only 5% of the compost that we produce, because we definitely prioritize just trying to get it to community members, to community gardens at larger quantities as well. And so for us, something that I had been sharing to before when we were preparing for this panel is that essentially a lot of our revenue for a lot of what sustains our processing work actually comes from grants or different donation work. And that's the way that our model mostly operates, and maybe some of the hauling also covers it, but we've seen that the fee for service that comes in from our bike-based collection from commercial and residential mostly sustains that and a little bit more of the work. But yeah.
Okay. So if I'm a subscriber to your program, am I able to get those bags of compost back? Does it work that way?
When people sign up, we give them one of our compost bags, and they can always order for the delivery of the bag on one of their routes.
Okay.
They essentially, for them, I think it's they're paying for us to compost their food waste.
Okay, so it's part of the service.
Mm-hmm.
Very good. Rhonda, so what does a yard, you sell by the yard vermicompost? Can you tell us first, I know you put your thing up there, tell us what vermicomposting is, kind of in a brief review, and then what does a yard of vermicompost go for out there? Oh, you're not muted.
Okay.
Or you
so vermicomposting is completely different from composting, completely different processes. And so it's using microorganisms and earthworms to break down organic materials and turn it into a very valuable soil amendment that there are thousands of research papers about how vermicompost helps plants grow bigger, they germinate more quickly, they have better developed roots, they have higher yields, they can suppress plant diseases and plant pests. And the difference in price between compost and vermicompost, if you're selling by the cubic yard, regular compost usually sells for, you know, maybe up to $30, maybe sometimes $35 per cubic yard. But vermicompost for a cubic yard, it sells for a minimum of $200 and goes up to $1,300 per cubic yard. So big price difference.
Yeah, we used to make a potting soil at the company I worked for, and you know, it was a hot commodity to get that as part of
The
our
vermicompost, yes,
Yeah.
yes, yeah. So
good.
anybody who's growing plants, like right now, you know, like if you're growing marijuana, you know, you really want to have the right soil amendments. And so vermicompost is usually one of those components because, you know, they know they're going to get bigger, better plants from it.
And how long does it take to make vermicompost?
It takes less time to create vermicompost than it does compost.
Okay.
The thing with compost is that, you know, you have to go through the cycle from mesophilic to thermophilic back to mesophilic, and then it needs to cure. It's very important to cure for several months, you know?
Right.
And so with vermicompost, you can have finished vermicompost in, you know, 45 to 60 days.
Okay. So you can
And
do
it's cured. It's cured already.
Oh, sorry. So you can do it under your sink at home all the way to a full facility that sells by the yard, right?
Yes, yes.
Very good.
And there are huge, like I said, huge operations all over the world doing vermicompost.
Are those red wiggler worms?
Yes, Eisenia fetida. There are over 9,000 species of earthworms. Only 7 have been identified that are suitable for vermicomposting, but the number one worm that's used, the number one worm species is Eisenia fetida, which, you know, common names, red wiggler is a big common name. If you go to other countries, they think they want a California redworm, and it's Eisenia fetida.
Okay.
It tolerates a wider range of conditions, and you know, has a really good rate for eating the feedstocks and reproducing and producing that valuable vermicompost.
Excellent. Well, thanks for your leadership in vermicomposting. It's excellent.
Thank you.
So Brian, tell us about WeCare and how the model works for you guys a little bit.
Well, I just want to say California redworm is a lot easier to say than the other word you were saying. I'm just saying, you know, so I'm going to go with California redworm. And the other thing I was thinking as you were just talking was, can you imagine 15 years ago if you said, hey, if you're growing marijuana, you know, this is the greatest, you know, this is great stuff for it. But it's just how far we've come. So it's fun to hear. We sell our material. So our model is in some areas is based on the front end tip fee, and you know, call it the 80-20 rule, where 80% of your profitability is on the tip fee and 20% is on the product sales. And then other areas of the country, it is vice versa. So where we get, you know, in Texas, we don't get much for a tip fee. We really have to focus on on getting more value for our product. In certain areas up, you know, in New Jersey and New York, where tip fees are a lot higher, we can balance that out a little bit more, and actually we still sell our product, but it's not the driving force sometimes behind our economic model. So we sell in bulk, we sell in bagged, we do value engineered soils, value added engineered soils, such as rooftop soils, where you can get a lot more money for every cubic yard of your compost if you've got it into a different type of engineered soil, like a rooftop soil. So I mean, the difference is, you know, you can sell compost, like Rhonda said, for anywhere from $10 to $30 a cubic yard, but I can get up to $50, $60 a cubic yard for my soils that I'm selling for, you know, for like a rooftop line. Some of the jobs that we've done are Lincoln Center, the green area, the green space where you can sit over at Lincoln Center. I don't know if many of you have been there, but if you haven't, it's a great location that you can actually access. the Javits Center. It's a 7-acre green roof, and we supplied the soil for that. So those are just, you know, 2 within the city that we've supplied over the years. And we've been doing the rooftop soils in New York City since like 2005. And then, you know, we continue to expand. Other areas you can add, you know, you compost and mulches and create more of a nutri-mulch where you're actually, you know, increasing the nutrient content into the soils, where a straight mulch will actually a lot of times deplete the soils of nutrient because it's all carbon. So just some of the different outlets and ways that we sell our compost, and you know, and then bagged, you know, down in you know, we're getting more and more into bag products just because we can actually reach further to more clientele, and actually our profit margin sometimes can be higher that way.
Excellent. And having had my share of marketing compost over the years, is it fair to say that you have to speciate out different marketing plans for different markets when you have a lot of compost?
Absolutely. And you know, in some of our sites, I mean, we have sites, you know, New York, let's take New York City, the Staten Island site. We operate 3 sites in New York City, but the Staten Island site, you know, we're producing about 40,000 cubic yards a year. And, you know, and we have to find a lot of different outlets. Now the city gives a lot of that back to the residents, and a lot of it goes back to the Parks Department. But then there's a big chunk of that we're working with them to actually bring value to the organics program, to the composting program, because the more value that we can bring to it, offset operational costs for the city, the more value there is in the program. So yes, we're recycling, we're keeping organics out of the landfill, but we're also helping to generate some additional revenue for, you know, for the city as well.
That's awesome. And Sashti, do you have any experience in the marketing of compost or anything you wanted to add to this part of the dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like some of the participants are here is how do I start maybe, or how do I engage maybe in starting a business in the compost space. For me, I used to be a public teacher, and I used to teach the master composting class in New York City. So, you know, a way is if you have a skill set, or if there's sort of a knowledge base that you think others are interested in, see if there's a way to sort of you know, spread that knowledge, and see if people are sort of willing to maybe donate or even pay for your workshops and for your time and energy in putting together lessons for those clients. So, you know, yes, education and knowledge is important, but there's also a way to maybe monetizing, you know, the value that you bring forth. And then for us as well, we've been lucky, and I feel like composting is becoming more mainstream. So there are a number of sort of partnership grants or grants available not only through New York State, but even the USDA. So the USDA's US Department of Agriculture, there's a number of community composting grants or research grants available. So that's actually a way that we've been able to sort of connect with other groups throughout California. We actually worked on a grant in California, and we'll be sending a number of our units out there through Cal Recycles grant program. We're able to start a facility in Buffalo, New York through a grant program through the DEC, Department of Conservation in New York State. So thinking about partnering on grants could be an opportunity for you to also promote your business.
Excellent. And I do think education is the future, how we educate, you know, on all these programs, and just some, you know, background, you know, writing curriculum in the school curriculum. We have 3 generations in Seattle that have never not composted their food scraps. So, so making it the norm through our school curriculum, I think that's just key to the future of everyone understanding the benefits of all of this. So, a bit more general, you know, how does what you do not only economically transform, you know, the community economically and build economic strength in the community, but, you know, what are your thoughts about your contribution, again, environmentally and socially in the programs you have? Because you can do any business, right? You can make widgets, but I've loved being in this space for all these years because there's so much more to it. So Ceci, how does your program add not just jobs and things. Well, jobs is a big part of it, but tell us more about the other benefits from your program.
Yeah, I mean, for us, we definitely see our work as environmental justice and climate justice work. Reasons why BK started, including just the lack of composting options. There was a lot of high truck traffic related to the waste industry in our community and a high concentration of waste transfer stations. There was a lack of employment opportunities for youth and young people, especially, Bushwick has been for the past couple of decades has some of the fastest rates of gentrification. And so with the closure of a lot of other like businesses to our startups of others, and even seeing the start of other green spaces, we saw a lot of local youth being left out of a lot of opportunities. And another factor that I'll bring in environmental justice wise is that North Brooklyn also, for folks who are familiar with like New York City too, sometimes like is seen as like a part of like a lead belt, where we have very high contaminations of like lead in our soils that make it unavailable, make it not safe for people to grow directly out of the soil. And so at BK Rot, we're dealing with our food waste issues. We're also doing it in a way that doesn't increase truck traffic, but instead relies on like bikes and kind of this micro localized system. We're creating employment opportunities for local youth and young people. And then our finished product of Compost has so many environmental and climate benefits as well. So for example, Compost has the ability to bind to lead, making it unavailable for plant roots to take it up. And so it's one of the few practical remediation, soil remediation techniques that we can use in addressing lead contamination that's accessible for communities and affordable. And Compost also supports, its ability to retain water. So thinking about either our soils going through droughts, so that capacity to retain water, or thinking about other climate impacts of increased flooding, its ability to act as this holder of water. And its ability to also support growing more green spaces, or there's been studies that link, bigger tree canopies with compost application too. So there's so many ways in which the compost just provides. And yeah, I love how Brian framed it too, as seeing food as a resource. Like, when I think about, I also do some farming or growing work, and all of the energy that it takes to grow a fruit or to grow a leafy green, and to think that we are just throwing this in the trash, when actually we are finding ways to return it to the earth and to support our local resilience and our food resilience, our climate resilience. I mean, everything. It's just composting, I think, shows you how interconnected all of our systems are.
Excellent, thank you. Sashti, what would you add to the work that you're doing, obviously in the education space, socially, environmentally, as well as economically?
Yeah, I just wanted to sort of continue how Ceci mentioned. I think community control and sort of distribution of waste definitely illustrates environmental justice is also racial justice. And sort of how she premised that a lot of Black and brown communities are facing a lot of environmental justice issues, and waste is one of those key areas where we could do better. So that's sort of what we talk about on our community composting bike tour that's coming up. Is food should be seen as valuable, not only the compost part, but the waste reduction opportunity. But also, and then I'm going to pivot from that, that data is also important. Data is incredibly valuable, and that's sort of where I feel like that's sort of a niche that we have with WeRadiate, is we're sort of collecting or using digital data, public data, and in one of the ideas, or one of the concepts we have built, is sort of a community data compost map. And this is a map that users across the state of New York, we have about 30 sites that are just inputting the amount of material that they're processing, every week, every month. And just in the last year, we've been up to 2.5 million pounds. So what this shows is we want to just show the potential, but also sort of our collective efforts in the composting sphere. And can this data be useful to change policy, can be useful to change legislation, and just get those in power or elected officials to understand really the value in what we think is garbage, which we think food scraps. A lot of people still think it's is worthless, but it's incredibly valuable. And we change those sort of those conversations, but also can we implement policy to actually make this valuable and sort of have New York State as a leader in this space.
And I appreciate so much you're starting to just get info. I think that's one of the challenges in our industry over all these years. Composting is a lot different than a MRF and all the costs they get compensated for. So I think that the collection of data to tell that story, I would love to subscribe to your map. So
Awesome.
I'll email you, and I'd love to stay in touch with that. But I think it's super smart to start telling the story with facts, because we miss a lot of that along the way when we don't record that stuff. So I think you're doing great.
And I'll put it in the chat, and it's free for anybody who's in New York State to use it. And we would love to expand it to other states for sure.
Okay, great. That's awesome. Hey, Brian, what would you add to the conversation in terms of the people you employ and how you guys work with the community?
Yeah, so we have a saying in our organization that you can be both good and great, meaning that we can do good and we can be great at what we do. And, which is, being the most innovative, being the most efficient, which should also bring more profitability. And then at the same time, we can be, what we're doing can be good for the environment. We can be good to our employees. We can be, do give backs and educational programs. So that's, it's a motto that, that we've been, our company's had us focused on. And I think it's a great motto to kind of live by, especially if you can do good and be great in your job. It's a pretty nice profession to be in. So we do, from a social aspect, we're trying to do more education. We're real focused on education as a company to educate people more about the environment and educate them about what we're trying to do, which is recycle anything that could go into the landfill originally, that was carbon-based, organic-based. We're trying to find beneficial use outlets for it. Sometimes that's not through composting. That can be through other forms of beneficial reuse. But we're trying to find those the best outlets for that material, and also preach the reduction, reduce, the hierarchy, right? Reduce, reuse, recycle, right? So we're constantly trying to do that. But we, from a social aspect, I mean, we employ locally. We're always, we're in a lot of cities where we're employing locally, and we're trying to recruit from that, from the areas that we're in, which, is good for the economy, good for that area. And nobody wants composting around them. I think we probably all have experienced that at one point or another, even though you're doing the right thing, but if you engage with the local community and show them what you're doing and how you're doing it and why you're doing it, it goes a long, long way in that getting the acceptance for these types of operations.
Excellent. And Rhonda, any closing comments from you on Vermicompost? I mean, you were clearly inspired to write the book and do all the great work you do, but what would you add to that in your experiences in the composting area? Oh, unmute. Okay. Oh, you got to unmute here. Let me see if I can do that. There we go. Okay.
Sorry about that.
We're good.
So yes, I've been working with composting and vermicomposting for 30 years. And I just want to emphasize that because I don't think the general public doesn't seem to understand the effects of food waste in landfills. Mm-hmm. They don't realize that, I mean, if you look at the generation rates of different types of trash, food waste is not the largest category, but it's the #1 category of waste going into landfills. And it doesn't just sit in a landfill and mind its own business. No, it slowly decomposes in an airless environment, which creates methane. And so people don't and methane is 34 times more potent than carbon dioxide in affecting the climate. And so landfills are one of the largest generators of climate change. So people need to understand that, like people are, there's an article today about hammerhead worms. Somebody's all up in arms about hammerhead worms. My response is, are you keeping your food waste out of the landfill? That's what you should be alarmed about. That's what you should be focusing on, because it's a huge driver of climate change. And we need to understand that. And whatever is available to us, we need to keep food waste out of the landfill. So it's wonderful that it's being collected by other people, but you can do it in your household or in your backyard. So, so I just want to encourage people to do that. And somebody asked in the chat about restaurants, if vermicomposting can take place. And in my book, I described a restaurant in Boise, Idaho, that in their basement, they have 2 huge worm bins. And so their food waste and their paper menus are being fed to the worms. So, and that's not the only, but yes, any type of business can do vermicomposting.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So we're going to leave some time for questions, but I'm going to ask one more and then we'll open it up for some of the questions that have come in. So what, when it comes to, your economic viability as an organization, what are your biggest challenges and what do you think are your biggest opportunities? I think we'll go the other direction today. And Brian, we'll start with you. Biggest challenges, biggest opportunities.
The biggest challenges that we face are, we continue to face, our biggest competition is the landfill, as I discussed before. So what they set their numbers at, we're not competing against other composters. We're competing from a business standpoint and profitability standpoint. We're competing against landfills. And until we get more policy in place to keep these valuable resources out of the landfills, that's what's going to drive the profitability. And the more you can drive profitability, the more innovation, within the technology that we can have. In addition, we battle contamination as we expand food waste. We haven't talked about contamination here today, but contamination is the biggest challenge for this, what I would call still a very untapped resource in food waste. And how do we get this valuable resource to our facilities in a manner that's not contaminated, that's not going to ruin our end product, which is the whole reason that we're in the business that we're in. So I could talk about contamination. I'll just leave it at that for now. But we're barely touching the surface of food waste recycling in this country. What, maybe 2% or 3%, something like that. And so it just tells you how much more we can do, but we have to figure out how are we going to collect it and how do we keep it clean? And so those are challenges as an industry that are evolving, but we have a long way to go.
Great. Ceci, biggest challenge, biggest opportunity for your organization?
I think for us, and it's like the challenges and when it comes to like revenue is, I think because of our model and because we're trying to pay youth workers like good salaries and wages too, our model definitely has to be in some ways dependent on grants in order to be able to do that work. And so, luckily we have like a strong team who does that type of work, but that's kind of like one of our consistent challenges. Also just in the city, just finding access to processing space. The city, New York City, I think really undervalues localized processing, and that's been shown, I think, just through some recent like plights that's been happening in the New York City composting community of a lot of really our primary composting organizations that deal with so much of the residential waste having to fight to be able to stay in the spaces that they're in of city property. And so I think that's always been like a challenge. And how do we maximize our capacity and how we process when space is a very big limitation and constraint? But we really believe in localized production. And I think our biggest, you said like the resource or the value, was it? Sorry.
What do you think your biggest opportunities are?
Opportunities. Um, I think right now also just thinking about like the landscape in which I think this post pandemic moment in which it brings this opportunity to kind of like re-envision how we manage our residential and our commercial waste. And right now, at least right before the pandemic, actually New York City had passed a law around commercial waste zone hauling to try to make that more efficient. And we were able to advocate to have this localized micro hauling and organic waste diversion and collection be incorporated into that policy. And so I think there's a lot of space and kind of just like how do we reimagine our systems to be more sustainable, and also in that sense, like how do we prove like the value of our work?
Excellent, excellent comments. Sashti, biggest challenges and opportunities for you and your organization?
Yeah, so certainly personnel. We actually will be releasing a community research data report soon. And one of the factors is finding people who, at least for me, we're looking for a data scientist with WeRadiate, but also finding people who care or align with sort of environmental issues or have an interest in compost. So sort of finding hard sciences, but also people who are passionate about maybe creating an impact, and sort of finding those personnel people. So I hope people on this thread think about that when they apply for opportunities. And second, pro and con. We've seen the supply chain issues that have happened in the last year. So manufacturing, we're doing it in New York State. We're working with NYSERDA, and NYSERDA is sort of New York State's renewable energy arm, to actually produce and manufacture our units here in New York. So in the beginning, it was difficult to find circuit boards or sensors, but there are manufacturing grants, and we just got one. We just found out on Monday that we're able to manufacture a number of them. It's called low volume manufacturing here in Rochester, New York. So being able to manufacture our items in New York State would be wonderful, also within the US as well. So having local supply chains is certainly an advantage that's happening.
That's great. Good. Congratulations. And Rhonda, take us out with your thoughts, biggest opportunities and challenges for you.
Okay, so I'm an educator, and my big concern is all the misinformation out there. So there's just a lot of misinformation on the web, and people get confused, and do's and don'ts about what you can compost or vermicompost. And if your composter is not working, then add worms. It's like, who came up with that idea? It's not true. So so I put my so I want to say this quickly, but I did in the chat, I think, yes, in the chat, I put my website, because unbiased information about vermicomposting and composting. So I have over 65 publications on there, and videos and podcasts and ways to learn how to vermicompost or compost.
Great. Okay, we're moving into our Q&A session. So Sam, would you like me just to read them off and go from here, or? Okay. So here's one. Do you have any recommendations on where to start for someone wanting to enter the composting for profit field, but are new to the food waste reduction and diversion realm? Anybody want to take that one? Where do you start?
I'm going to say, Kay, I don't know where you live, which city you are based in, but I would say see what's happening locally and try to connect with those organizations already doing the work, and see where their sort of pain points are, right? See, when you see an organization, you think it runs effectively and really smooth, but there's always improvements that can be made. So see where your interests align, as well as where the pain points are in that organization. See if that could be a starter, but just check out who's in your neighborhood. And if you're in New York City, there's dozens of groups that you can connect with locally.
I would say, educate your, like, sort of piggybacking off that, educating yourself through organizations like the U.S. Composting Council, where, you can take compost training. You can take, there's a lot of resources that you can find there. I don't, as far as starting your business, there's so much that goes into starting a business that that would take a whole nother session here. But I would educate myself as much as possible and try to make connections with others in the industry as much as possible, and try to learn from others in the industry and go from there.
And there is a U.S. Composting Council mentorship program too, that seems to be getting some traction. I would mention myself. Anyone else on that one? We have a few more questions coming in. So here's one, Brian. How are you able to secure the city as a partner?
They put out a request for proposals, and it's like a bid, but it's instead you put a proposal together based on their scope, and then you put pricing in, and then they interview you, and there's different criteria, and they grade you, in different ways based on how they put the procurement together, and then you get selected. So it's a process that most municipalities have two ways of choosing who they partner with, and one's through a straight bid process, which would be strictly who's the lowest price. And then there's the RFP process, which is who's going to bring us maybe not the lowest price, but the most value for our project. And so we've been, partnered with the city now for, like I said, since 2007. We partnered with Rockland County, New York, Burlington County, New Jersey, Ann Arbor, Michigan, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Phoenix, Arizona. So we have a lot of these public-private partnerships that all of them we have secured through RFP processes.
Great. And how do you, here's a follow-up question. How do you source bulking agents for your operation?
So depending on where you are in the country, some areas it's very easy. Like in the Northeast right now, there is an abundance of wood. Go to the tree, like the arborists in the area. They're always looking for outlets for their wood chips. They're looking for, if they can go and find a cheap outlet for their wood chips and it's close by them to wherever they are. Transportation is usually the biggest hurdle and cost in any business model. And so that's where I would start, is with the arborists in the area. And the parks departments, like in New York City, I mean, they've got more wood than they know what to do with most of the time. So, but in other areas of the country, we struggle with it. In like Florida, depending on where you are, we get a lot of palm, which is not good for composting. It just takes forever to break down, and is just a tough. It's tough to compost, but there are certain areas of the country where we have to be more creative, and sometimes have to pay to take in bulking agent, which is not the model we want to have if possible, but we actually do that in certain areas.
And I know when fuel prices go up, the wood becomes less available, right?
Because they're burning it.
So does BK Rod have to go source bulking agents?
So in New York City, they're essentially like landscapers have to pay in order to dump their wood chips or browns in different places. And so we have a convenient relationship there where we're like, well, you don't have to pay here, just give them to us for free. But so that's a relationship with like landscapers, or there's a lot of composters sourced from like cemeteries also that are cutting down trees and have a lot of sources of wood chips. But yeah, I would say from like arborists and cemeteries are some of the main sources that we've used at BK Rod. And then there's also a lot of wood shops as well. And for that, I would just recommend you make sure that whatever wood shavings, if you're using that as like an agent too, that you're just making sure it's from untreated wood.
Perfect. Great. Here's one for you, Rhonda. Can you do vermicomposting at restaurants?
Yes, I already addressed that. Yeah. The last time I spoke, I said that in my book, I described a restaurant in Boise Idaho.
Oh, that one.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, and it's taken place in other restaurants too. So, you know, so
Could they read
there
your
was a
book?
restaurant, there was a high-end restaurant that had worm bins right in the dining room, so people could see them. You know, they wanted to promote their green image,
Or
and
you could put a little tub right under your seat and just, right?
there you go, just dump it in. But
Compost
I
as
mean,
you eat.
but
I love
yeah,
that.
so
That might be my new business.
yeah.
Here's a good question. We have a few minutes left. What New York City policies would you like to see passed that would help your business? And we'll start, Rhonda, with you this time. Are there policies in New York City that would help your business? Unmute.
Sorry, I live in North Carolina,
Oh,
so I'm
okay.
not that familiar with New York policies.
Okay.
So I'd ask somebody else.
Okay, Sashti, are there policies that would help your business?
Yeah, I can't think of any. I know there's a whole bunch of policies. I think participatory dialogue could be done maybe with an idea of environmental issues. New York City is deeming or hoping to go sort of whether it's zero waste or whether it's sort of climate neutral. I mean, these are ideal goals, but maybe actually having funding or putting funding into those goals would be valuable, in having the city or residents actually vote on them. And I think there is participatory dialogue that's already happening. So what people who don't know what that term means, it's essentially a number of projects that a district, let's say your elected city council member has at that certain level, and people who live there can vote on the top 10, and it's chosen, it's given funding, but actually having maybe an environmental or organics or something that's considered or in the top 3 that people can actually choose. So having sort of that focus could be really helpful.
Great. Anyone else want to add anything to that, policies that would help with your business?
Yeah, I'll add here in thinking about like for the question about New York City, I think it's also extends out to New York State policies as well. And for example, like there is some like law or rule that says composting cannot happen on parks or in those types of like public spaces, but obviously it's happening in New York City. But recently we've seen parks try to use this legal language to say that to justify kicking off sites that have been processing in their spaces. And so I think there could be we're looking at least to say like in areas that are, like urban, like there's a lot of urban density like New York City, there should be types of like exemptions as long as, it's still open to the public or serving other parts of like parks missions, for example. But yes, I think there's also a lot of emerging climate laws that where composting is like can be connected and relevant in there too. And New York City also, I think it's both like a how is the budget allocated question, and combined with also are there certain like pilot programs or different things that we can do in thinking about creating more efficiency in residential organics collection and processing, and with the commercial waste zones law, right, as that actually comes into practice, seeing how local composting, local organic waste collection and processing can also be included or supported in the enacting of that law.
Great. Other comments on that?
I just want to jump in. Oh, Brian, go first.
Yeah, I'm just going to say, I know it's extreme, but to say that, to make it mandatory. So make food waste composting mandatory, and there's a lot that goes into that. There's it's going to would be a huge political hot button, but mandatory with some teeth behind it. So because you can pass laws, you can pass regulations, and if you don't police it, it's as good as a piece of paper it's written on. So you have to have a way of enforcement. And if the longer people think that the normal resident thinks that whatever I put out to the curb is free, even though it's built into our taxes, there's an issue there. Because until they see the value in reduction and recycling, what's incentivizing them to actually do it. So it's easy for a lot of us that live this every single day to say, hey, you know, that's the way we're going to go. But the majority of people are only going to do it if it's easily identifiable and easy to do. So you have to make it easily to identify and say, okay, this is how I do it. And is it as simple as me when I was going to my trash can before and putting everything in the trash can? So there's a lot to take in there, but that's where we have to get to eventually.
And quickly, and I usually do this for education, but New York City's Department of Sanitation's budget is about $1.7 billion. It's a capital B. In that, there's a waste export. So that essentially, New York City doesn't have landfills. So New York City, as taxpayers, pay for the movement of waste outside of the city. And that's about $400 million a year. It goes to other states like Ohio, Carolinas. But if there's a way to reallocate that for composting services or programs instead of going to a landfill, I mean, we have the potential for funding is here to do those programs. Susan, now you're muted.
Oh, I'm unmuted now. We're down to a minute or up at time. Rhonda, would you want to add anything to that last comment before we close? Unmute.
I'm sorry about that. I was going to say, I think it's worth looking at what San Francisco is doing, because it's another really large city with a very diverse population, and they have been very successful with their big three carts. So you get a trash cart, recycling, and organics, which is yard waste and food waste. And they have a lot of hurdles, just like, and you know, New York does, you know, different hurdles, but it's worth taking a look at how they've set that up. So just throwing that out there.
Great. Okay, well, we're at time. This has been an excellent dialogue. Thank you all so much for your comments and participation. Great job. And unless Sam has anything further to say, we are going to adjourn this session, but we thank you all for being here and for your enthusiasm and passion for food scrap recovery as a resource. So thank you.
Great. Thank you, Susan, for moderating.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Hope you enjoyed.
Thanks to everybody for tuning in.